Well, hello and welcome back to the fourth lesson for Affinity Designer. And today we're going to look at what we can do with photographs with regards to editing and manipulating them within Affinity Designer. Now there is also Affinity Photo available, which is quite a specialist piece of software, which I like to refer as being like a scalpel. It will allow you to do almost anything, but it takes patience, time and precision. And also it's almost a whole new package to learn. But some of the features in here you would find in Affinity Photo. But for at least 95% of the work that you might need to do as a business or a ministry or a charity, you'll probably find Affinity Designer will actually offer, as you're about to see. So let's get stuck into this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in an image, and I'm going to simply use the drop and drag technique. And here we are, let's just place that there. And it's a large image because it is. So page is set up for A4. This is a high resolution image and it's a lot bigger, as we can see. Now, as long as I can grab it to roughly being on the page, what I can do now is come down to my dimensions in my transform tool on the bottom right corner, and we can just change that size. So if I lock the aspect ratio, clicking on there, let's just halve the size for the moment. So let's simply put that at 250 and the rest of it should rescale. There we are. So now that's much easier to manipulate. So I can switch my snap on if it's not already on. Click on the little magnet. And then if I take that to the top corner, you'll see the little bars light up, our guidelines, and it sticks in that corner. Now I can simply, it's my moving it around, there we go. Now I can drag this corner to make it kind of fit. Now you see kind of fit is the word I used, because it's actually a different aspect ratio. Now one thing we can do to do that is to actually trim this to make the shape fit better, because basically it's too long for the A4. Now I could cut out some of this, or I could cut out some at the other end, and in fact at the other end that little rock is a bit of a distraction. So to cut that out, we're going to reshape the actual whole image here. To do that, we're going to come down our side tools here, and this one here is vector crop. So if I click on that, that will allow us to literally realign the page. So if I do this, now what's happening is in vector crop, it's not getting rid of it. So for example, that's not cropped. I can actually now just go back and stretch it back out if I choose to. So this allows us the opportunity to sort of look at reshaping things. Perhaps we don't need as much of this foreground at the bottom, so we can take a little bit of that out perhaps. And again, perhaps on the side, we can just bring that in a little bit. And if we're happy with that, then excellent, job done. So now I can simply go back to my move tool, take that back to the corner. Now let's try and stretch that out again. Well, it's a slightly better fit, but what we really need to do is take more of the edge off. So again, I'll just go back to the crop tool. So this time I'll take a little bit more from this end to about there. And then if I just drag this back out, take that to there, click on my move tool, and just resize that. Hey presto, almost fit, almost. Let's not worry too much about that bottom bit. Now of course we could actually stretch the image. We don't necessarily want to. What I mean by that is if now in the move tool mode up in this corner, I can squash the image, which you can see is compressing it. And obviously our character there, our model, has now just been shrunk. It's been flattened. So now let's take it back the other way, stretch it out. Now as we know, it wasn't quite the perfect fit, but to stretch it up a little bit just to make it fit in this aspect ratio is not too bad. If you're doing something extreme like that, obviously that's too obvious. So sometimes stretching image is not a bad thing, but make sure you've got the snapping tool on to make it work. So there we are, that's our photo cropped. Now what we're going to do is look at how do we do some editing of the picture. Now you may recall from the first video I talked about our environment and I said this is our design persona, but then we also have pixel persona. And what we're going to do now is click on that, and that will take us into a whole new tool set. Voila! Now our assets have come up again, which is a bit of a distraction. So if you remember, the way to get rid of that is we go to View, we go down to Studio, and we turn off Assets. And that's because we're in a different persona now. So a different persona is almost like a different software. But our tools have changed, as you can see. The tools I want to look at are down this bottom end. We have selection tools, which we're not going to cover in this video, but that allows us to select particular objects and take them out and manipulate accordingly as separate objects in there. So in other words, we'll be able to extract this character, the photographer, and lose the background altogether. But that's a bit of a detailed task for another time. So in this case, what we're going to do is, because we're going to manipulate the photo, what we don't want to do is damage the photo. So as I've said before, first thing we'll do is we'll come to our layer, right click on the item and duplicate. That way we've got our backup underneath, we're not destroying it. And we'll make sure we're working on the top layer for now. So first thing we can see is we've got some nice highlight areas here, dark areas across the board, and some light areas there. Now we're going to want to manipulate them later and bring it to our advantage. But the first thing is the whole image is a little bit dark. So what we can do is we can apply well, not exactly a filter, but we can apply an effect to all of the image. And to do that, we're going to come down here and we have an adjustment. So we're going to adjust the whole of the picture in this case. If I click on that, there's a whole range of tools that come up. And as you can see, that's quite a lot of things to learn. But for now, we're only going to focus on two in this tutorial. The first one we're going to focus on is our brightness and contrast. So if I click on that, this toolbox opens up. Now I highly encourage actually sometimes turning things to the extremes so you can see exactly what the effect does. So I want to turn that down to nothing, and you can see it's almost black in the image. Turn the brightness up to 100%, and actually it's not overblown it. There are bits which are pure white, which we call blown out in photography, but it shows how dark the image really was. So that's what that tool does. Let's take it back to center. Let's have a look what contrast does. So if I take contrast all the way down, you'll see it's kind of softened everything. It's almost created a foggy effect. If I take it the other way, it's done the opposite. So what we want to do is play with both of these until we're happy with what we've got. And it is what we're looking for. There is no right and wrong. So we're going to brighten it up a bit. Take the contrast down. It's making it quite foggy. Take it up. It just gives it a bit more vibrance. So I'm going to take it to about there. And the brightness, yeah, I think I'm kind of happy with that. So this is our starting point for our photograph, and when we're happy we can close that. Now if we want to come back and change it, it's sitting here in this layer, so I can just double click on it and it will come back up for us to adjust if we need to. Now the next one I want to look at with regards to our adjustments, if I click down here, is I want to look at HSL. Let's click on that. So HSL stands for Hue, Saturation and Luminosity. Now hue is almost to say what kind of colour it is, what shade of colour it is, if you imagine a colour spectrum. So if I slide this along from 0, you'll see that what we've got is the greens are now being emphasised, then we're moving towards the yellows, the blues, and if we go the other way, get the same kind of effect. So that's affecting the whole of the image, and that can be quite effective. So in our case though, we certainly want to bring out some of the colours, so we're going to just bring in a little of the green. Now saturation, if we turn the saturation down, we will go to mono, which is black and white. If we turn it up, it will just make it so saturated it's actually pixelating in places. So that's how we bring a lot more colour to an image. So in our case, we don't want too much, but we'll just take it to about there, 20. And of course we can always enter in the boxes if we choose to. Now luminosity is more or less how light an image is. So it's not brightness, it's the whole of the image. So if I turn the luminosity down, it will literally go to black. Turn it all the way up, and it will literally go to white. So now what I don't want is, even though that might look better, we're going to do some other editing in a moment. So I kind of want it still to be dark in places because we're going to play with that. So I'm going to leave it where it was at 0. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now what I can do though is let's just compare that to our original. So if I highlight this layer and the layer beneath, I can turn them off. And let's see where we started. So that's the image we started with. This is where we're currently at. So it's already changed it. Now the tools over here I want to look at are these ones here. This one is a dodge tool and a burn tool. So let's see what happens when we select the dodge tool. And we get a very large brush, which is probably too large. So let's just turn that down. Okay, and now let's just see what happens if I click and drag on this area here. What we'll see is very subtly, we'll click back on that picture there, it's actually lightening. So also, like I said then, make sure we're actually working on the layer we want to work on, which in our case we want to work on our sample image. So here we've got some highlights on these rocks, so I'm going to just bring them out a little more. Even here, even in the tree, let's just bring that up a bit. This is all quite nicely lit, so just bring that down, a bit of the foreground here. Just under this tree where it's dark, let's just bring a bit more texture back in by lightening it up a little bit. As you can see, the details there, it's just been lost. So bring that back in. Then we can do the opposite. So if I click on the burn, this will now allow us to darken. In fact, you can see that as I hover over the water. So our characters are a little bit too bright, so let's just darken them a bit. And some of this water, let's just darken this down around. And perhaps we need to increase the brush size. Okay, so we're just darkening, especially the foreground, because we don't want our attention to be dragged into this foreground area. We kind of want to look at where the photographer's looking. There we go. That's good. Now here it was a little bit too bright, so I'm just going to take that down a bit. Same again, just bring this brush in and darken the edges a bit here. Possibly a bit there. So effectively we're shaping, we're painting our image. We're painting and affecting exactly where we want the viewer to look. Probably over-brighten that a little bit. Just there we go. So what a contrast, eh? Now the other tools we've got here are we have a blur brush. So what that will allow us to do is simply blur an area so you can see the photographer's feet are now totally gone. I'll just undo that. So why would you do that? Well, the reality is sometimes you want your attention to be drawn to a particular place. Now in our case, our photographer is obviously part of it and where he's looking. So like I said, I think it's this line of sight is important. What we don't really want is all this distraction around us. So just by simply taking that brush and just bringing it around the edge, you'll see it's very subtly blurred that. It's also creating more depth because we're looking more into it. Same as up here in the trees. Do we need this amount of detail? Should we just blur that out a little bit? Subtle, but you can see where the attention is dragging you to. Now then we have the opposite is true, which is our sharpening brush. If I click on that, we can bring out the detail here, just along this centre. It just sharpens it up just a little bit more, give it a little bit more bite, a bit more punch. Voila. And that is our manipulated image. So let's do a comparison. Take the HCL off, we can see what difference that makes. And if we take the image back to what it was, that was our original. And then with the HCL on, totally different image. If we take that layer and put it at the top, just so we can see the difference. So that's before, that's after. Before, after. And of course, at this point, we can now go back to our design persona. And now we have access to the previous tools we had. So now we can take our artistic text tool, and I'm going to want it there, and I'm going to put photography, and I'll just center that here. It's a distraction. Now also, I said before about colours. If we're going to use this, we could have vibrant colours, for example, something like this, something like that, something like that. But actually, this is what often makes things look quite amateurish. What professionals do, or should I say what we do, is typically we will take a sample of the colour that's already used in the image. Now the fact is I've moved it up into the blurred area because again we don't want the attention on the background, we want the attention in the foreground. So already that's going to lift my text and make it punchier. I've just centered that where I want it. We haven't even looked at the font to choose yet, but what we're going to do is we're going to take a sample. Now because we're in a dark part of the photograph, we're going to want a light colour. And we have a few options. We've clearly got this light lime colour here, or we've got this vibrant green in here. And of course, because we're selecting a pixel, we can literally choose a very vibrant pixel. And then when we're happy, we can double click. So that's definitely created from within the colours we've got, but I'm still not happy with that colour, so I'm going to take a sample down here. And it actually might be that we don't actually want green at all. We might want a light beige or brown. So let's try that again. So here we have all these options. Let's take that one. There we are. So that might be working better. Now what I'm going to do at this point though is select a font. So let's see what we've got. Quite like that. Let's go with that. Let's pop that in the centre between these two trees. Again, positioning plays a part. So let's pop it there. Now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to copy it, Control C, click on the page, Control V. Now what we've got is we've got the photography word over here. Look, we've got two layers. On the bottom layer, what I want to do is I want to just drag it out a little bit to make it larger. Now if I press and hold Control, it expands like that, it kind of extrudes. The alternative is to press the shift. That'll allow us to stretch and manipulate as well. But if I want to take it just out and down a little bit, I'm just trying to make it a bit bigger. So I'm just manually doing that. Let me just show you by changing the colour on this. There. Now because I'm playing within the colour wheel, I'm still dealing with the brown. What I've done is I've created the shadow effect. And it's subtle. In fact, let's just change the colour so it's more obvious. He says. Let's go proper. There we go. So I've totally chose a totally different colour now. You can see there is a difference. In fact, let's go to that. Come on. There we go. So it's still subtle because I'm at that end of the spectrum. Let's go to red. So that's what we've done. Now what we're going to do with this though now is I'm going to simply just make it slightly more translucent. So whilst on this layer, you'll see we have opacity, it says 100%, and we have what's called blend modes. Now by playing with these, you can get different effects, which I highly recommend you have a play with. In my case, I'm going to stick with normal though. What I am going to do though is change the opacity so it's not so solid. And I'll probably just take that down to about 75%. You can see that the background's coming through. So there's nothing. I'm bringing it in. Now the reason I'm going to go for 75% is it's allowing some of it to leak forward, but we're going back to our actual colour again if you remember. So we're going to go back to that brown or beige, and then we're going to go to the darker end of the spectrum. So now we've created this kind of shadow effect. There we are. That's just that bit better. Or of course we could have gone for a green so it brings out them colours. And that's basically how we add graphics to a photograph that we just created the way we did it. So I hope you found that tutorial useful. And of course don't forget you can save the image, export it as a JPEG or a PNG, and then bring it in as a separate image into your next design project. Okay, so now let's just have a quick chat about how we can export this image. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to File. Now if we go to Save, or should I say Save As, it will give us various options, but you can see already it's saving as an Affinity file. And in fact this is Affinity Design or Affinity Template. So typically you'd say OK and save it. Now that's for saving the file so you can come back and carry on with your artwork. But if this is now the final piece and you want to export, we're going to go to File, Export, and then we have multiple options, and there are many to choose from. So if you wanted it as a PDF, you'd simply select on PDF. It then has some presets, so you can decide on whether it's going to be for printing press, whether it's simply a small digital document, flattened, where everything's compressed again, or typically you're going to go for print. And again, it would probably be 300 dpi because it's talking actual print on printers. If you're simply printing on your home printer, or you want it to be passed to a friend to print out, by reducing the DPI, you're making the file size smaller. Already, this is estimated it being a 7 megabyte file, which is quite large. Also, we have the option of selecting whether we want the whole document, or if there are elements in here, such as the photography only that was selected from our design, then we could just export that on its own. Typically though, apart from PDF, you're most likely going to be using JPEG. Now JPEG, again, you have different qualities, and that's all going to do with the size of the image. You can also physically change the dimensions here by making sure the padlock's on, because if it's not and you change the width or height, then that will distort the whole image. Again, if the file size is too big, this says at the moment as a JPEG it's 9.5 megabytes. I can reduce the quality, and you'll find it will recalculate now. Suddenly it's down 2.41. So if you want to email this to someone, it's probably better to send them the sample looking like this instead of the full quality version. So again, that's a useful feature to know. And again, we have the choice of area, whether we want the whole document or a selected part of the document. Let me just demonstrate that. So if I was now just to select photography, it's highlighted. I'll go to File, Export, JPEG. Now, instead of it whole document only, when I click on the area, I have the selection only, or the selection area, or the whole document. So if I was to go whole document now, at full size, I click export, it then tells me where do I want to put it, and I name it there, and that would then give us our exported file to use for another occasion. So thank you for watching.